A few moments later, Hua Yonho seemed to be struggling with something. It turned out, he instead brought the two corpses to go with him. He apparently had a good heart because he could not leave those corpses, as they could become food for tigers, and he also could not bury them because he was powerless. Therefore, he decided to find a shelter first before thinking about the next step. When urging his horse to move, suddenly the horse refused to do so, as if there was something in that place, and its animal instinct was afraid to step forward. However, Hua Yonho kept forcing it, even shouting at it non-stop to move. That was when disaster happened, where the horse instead kicked him because of the treatment it received. The small body of Hua Yonho was instantly thrown, accompanied by the sound of lightning striking on that tense night. Hua Yonho, who was in danger, did not know what to do anymore. He had no choice but to protect his head so it wouldn't hit anything when falling from the fairly steep mountain. After falling endlessly, he would soon land, but there was a pile of bushes there. Fortunately, there were bushes, because his life could be in danger if what awaited him was the ground or sharp mountain rocks. Although his whole body was in pain, at least he was still alive without losing consciousness. He then began to get up while checking his body, whether it was still intact. After making sure he only had minor injuries due to the impact, he became curious about this place. He did not expect there to be a hidden cave behind the bushes. He instantly laughed so cheerfully because this place was very suitable for sheltering from the rain or wild animals so he could sleep soundly. At the same time, the horse that was with him apparently followed his trail while carrying the corpses on its back. Hua Yonho was very annoyed and wanted to beat the horse, but he was also too lazy to do it. Therefore, he decided to tie them up so they wouldn't go anywhere. Now the situation was truly a mess, and this was the reason why he preferred staying at home. To be safe in case his brother came looking for him, he left a mark in front of the cave. Moreover, Hua Sanho would definitely be able to find the horse's tracks before reaching this place. He had used a lot of energy and thought, so he just wanted to sleep. Although this place was very hard and made his body uncomfortable, it was still better than being rained on, plus his worry about wild animals. Amid all that, Hua Yonho hoped nothing happened to his brother, even hoping he would not find that bad person. Because if that happened, they would surely fight, and to sleep peacefully he should trust his brother, since he was the genius and strong one in their clan. A few moments later, Hua Yonho fell sound asleep as the horse's rope had come loose. Hua Yonho did not hear that, and he continued enjoying his night after being forced to move all day. However, something he didn't realize began approaching him. Even a strange energy enveloped him. That strange energy even made his body float without him realizing it. Not only floating, but Hua Yonho's body was pulled into the cave. Even though he was in such a state, he truly did not feel anything. What was more astonishing was that his body struck the cave wall, but he was not injured, and his body slowly entered into it. A few hours later, Hua Yonho opened his eyes, and he began to feel confused. He was sure this place was not the previous place, even the air was very strange. Hua Yonho kept wondering where he was now, and whether something happened while he was asleep. The only logical thought in his mind at this moment was the possibility that he moved deeper because he slipped while sleeping. But all that turned tense when he heard a voice calling him a part of the humans destined to meet him. So shocked, Hua Yonho even fell because he saw a strange light. The light looked faint, but a voice could be heard saying that Hua Yonho was the heir of his martial art. Hua Yonho was curious how a light could talk, and whether he was dreaming right now. Then the light responded that he was a being who had surpassed the limits of physical creatures and was now speaking to him through space and time. Therefore, he asked the young man before him to accept his will and conquer the world. However, Hua Yonho instead shouted, calling him a terrifying ghost. The light asked him not to be afraid and tried to explain that he was already dead and now only his will remained. As a being who had surpassed human limits, he had prepared this for someone destined to inherit him, and the young man before him only needed to accept his will without hesitation. After thinking quickly, Hua Yonho smiled because he felt this situation was very advantageous. This cave was a place without the presence of humans and only the will of a strange old man. He instantly became very excited because this was truly something destined for him. For him, heaven had given him a gift for his kindness by not letting the 2 corpses be eaten by wild animals, and he did not even need to go to the martial arts training hall, as he could become strong here. He was truly confident he would inherit the will of the strange old man before him, even willing to correct the morals of the world as he desired. Then the light said that Yonho was fairly talented, so at least he could imitate his technique with 30 years of non-stop hard training. That terrifying statement made Yonho lose his laughter because he did not want to spend 30 years of his time. Before the light continued speaking, Yonho asked him to stop. He then smiled and firmly stated that the fate he meant did not seem meant for him. The light immediately reacted, because by inheriting his technique, he could become unbeatable, even conquer the world. Yonho had decided without hesitation because he preferred to pass on that opportunity rather than be trapped in this place for 30 years. Returning to the story of Mad Dog the Beggar, where the interesting tale had just begun. Although Yonho refused that, fate would still choose him. With this, he who was a loser and a true slacker would transform into someone incredibly strong. Even with one movement, he could wipe out dozens of enemies and destroy all their weapons. That could happen because it was a technique that had surpassed human understanding itself. Then Yonho showed his respect for the offer, but he had to refuse it and chose to run away instead. But the light kept calling him and asking Yonho to listen to him. Instantly, the light began revealing its human form, although this was only his will from when he lived as a human. Seeing that, Yonho instead called him a fraud because he did not show that form from the beginning. The old man who heard that looked quite annoyed because a brat dared to belittle him as a fraud. For Yonho, the old man acted as if he was someone important, but when he failed, he showed himself. The figure again emphasized that he was not pretending to exist, but this form was merely a will that had separated from his physical body, not something like an ordinary human. But Yonho seemed unconvinced, even thinking the old man before him was trying to deceive him again. Therefore, he decided to attack him to prove what he said. Unexpectedly, Yonho was shocked because the old man he thought was real did not have a physical body as he expected. Not only that, he passed through his body just like that without feeling any touch. With this, he was sure that the being before him was not human, but a demon inhabiting this cave. Remaining calm, the figure explained that he was not a demon, but a technique that could be performed by those who had reached the pinnacle realm. While Yonho repeatedly called him a demon, the old man truly lost his patience. Actually, he did not want to show that version of himself to maintain his dignity, but the brat he met was truly very insolent and unaware of his place. That story was the beginning of Yonho meeting his master and the start of him learning the greatest martial art in the world. Then the child in front of Mad Dog asked whether such a technique was truly real. Mad Dog confirmed it because the technique could only be performed by martial artists who had reached the pinnacle realm. The child tried to understand, but he was curious who could use such a technique. Mad Dog seriously asked whether the young man before him had ever heard of the Sword Emperor. The child had, of course, heard of him, especially since he was a historian, and that figure was rumored to be the greatest person in history. Even his name would remain eternal in the history of martial arts, never to be eroded by time. Mad Dog laughed and confirmed all that Baek Muhan the Sword Emperor was indeed the master of Yonho the Unbeatable. However, the child found it hard to believe because Baek Muhan was a pinnacle master who lived 300 years ago. Mad Dog did not deny that, but in reality he met Yonho, and among the pinnacle masters there existed things difficult for ordinary humans to understand, even among them some could be compared to gods themselves. The child was endlessly shocked by such an astonishing story, and he believed that Yonho must have asked to become a disciple after learning that fact. Instantly Mad Dog laughed because this was the best part, because Yonho was the true slacker like no other in this world. During his life until he died and time passed for hundreds of years, the Sword Emperor never passed down his technique, and he had to take a disciple, even forcing Wai Yonho to inherit it. However, Wai Yonho did not understand why the old man was so angry. Moreover, he did not come from the Baek clan, and he was also not interested in learning martial arts for that long. Baek Muhan truly lost his dignity as a figure compared to a god, and he would not allow Wai Yonho to escape. Instantly, with a movement of his hand, he moved a large stone until it blocked the exit. Wai Yonho, who witnessed that, began to worry because he had gotten himself into another problem. It had been hundreds of years since Baek Muhan had met any human, and he was truly satisfied doing this, added with that stone being 3 meters thick, making it impossible for a child to break through it. Then he approached while teasing the boy in front of him, saying that if he was willing to become his disciple, then cutting a stone like that could be done like cutting paper. Wai Yonho felt he had no choice and he would not give up just like that. Baek Muhan did not understand what he was trying to do, but it was absolutely impossible to destroy that thick stone. Wai Yonho had no intention of slashing it, because he also realized his own abilities, but he tried to do something different. The Sword Emperor questioned the ridiculous sight in front of him. Without hesitation, Wai Yonho said that he only needed to dig this cave and get past that large stone. Even though it was very hard, a stone could certainly be destroyed little by scraping it using a sword made of the best iron, and if he kept doing that then he could succeed at least within 1 year or 2 years. Baek Muhan wondered whether a boy like Wai Yonho would really continue doing this for 2 years. While laughing, Wai Yonho did not expect that such words would come out of the mouth of someone who told him to train for 30 years. Baek Muhan was truly furious, but he could not do anything because their bodies could not make physical contact. Therefore, he tried to coax him in various ways, even softening his words, but Wai Yonho was truly not interested. Baek Muhan understood, and he would reduce their training by only 20 years. But Wai Yonho seemed to make fun of him by saying that such time was too long, and he might consider it if it was only 3 years. Those words of course made the Sword Emperor boil, because his martial art was not something that could be mastered in 3 years, not even by a genius. For Wai Yonho, he did not mind that, and that meant the two of them were not fated to have a master-disciple relationship. Since there was nothing left to talk about, he would continue digging because he had wasted his precious time on a useless conversation. The Sword Emperor's patience was truly at its limit, and he did not expect to be treated like this, even though in the past everyone was willing to become his disciple, even begging him, yet he refused them. But he also could not do anything, because Wai Yonho was the first human in hundreds of years to come to this cave, and he promised to make him the strongest in the world in 5 years. That statement made Wai Yonho start thinking, because he began to consider that becoming the strongest in the world within 5 years might not be too bad. Besides, he had never heard of any human who could preserve his will like this even though his physical body had died. Therefore, Wai Yonho began to slightly believe that the strange human-shaped being in front of him might be telling the truth. He then threw his sword because trying it was not a problem, and he could stop if the strange old man who claimed to be the Sword Emperor was lying. With this, Wai Yonho was willing to become his disciple for the next 5 years, in order to become the strongest and fulfill the old man's will. In that story, Mad Dog believed that at that time Wai Yonho still doubted the Sword Emperor, but in such a situation, the Sword Emperor was truly pitiful for finding the son of the true Lazybones. After agreeing to become his disciple, Wai Yonho suddenly fell asleep. This made Baek Muhan truly lose his patience as he kept shouting at him to wake up. Due to the disturbance, Wai Yonho woke up while asking what his master was trying to do. He tried to explain that humans needed time to sleep, unlike him who was already dead. Baek Muhan had to restrain himself as if he needed Wai Yonho more than his teachings, and he grumbled while telling him to immediately start training. However, Wai Yonho kept protesting because he had just woken up and wondered why he had to train that quickly. They then began their training, and the Sword Emperor nearly lost his sanity, saying that this training would not be finished even if it took 50 years, because Wai Yonho only moved and then rested repeatedly. Casually, Wai Yonho asked whether there was no easier method, and Baek Muhan replied that this was the easiest method. Those words made Yonho irritated, even saying that he should have looked for a competent master from the start instead of a master who made things difficult for his disciple. The Sword Emperor had never felt this angry even when facing countless enemies during his life, but every word that came out of the boy's mouth in front of him was sharper than any sword. If Baek Muhan had a physical body, he would surely suffer internal injuries caused by the buildup of chi from his uncontrollable anger. At the moment of his death, Baek Muhan had hoped for glory from the martial art he would pass down, but now he felt that this will of his was a disaster for himself. He was also treated like a foolish old man because of his disciple's extremely disrespectful behavior, and if he had had a physical body, he would definitely have beaten him up. With his rude behavior, Yonho asked how his master did that. What he meant was lowering the previous large stone, and whether he could not use that power to control his body and teach him martial arts, so Yonho would not be troubled. Baek Muhan then answered that he had only triggered the mechanism he had prepared during his life, so he did not need a physical body to do it. More clearly, he pulled a rope using chi through an object held from afar. After saying that, the Sword Emperor realized something. Instantly, his expression changed as if he had discovered something extraordinary. Yonho thought his master had lost his mind, added with his expression being so sly. All this time, Baek Muhan had been trapped in the thought that without a physical body he could not do anything, but thanks to Yonho, he realized something that should have been very simple. Yonho thought his master had truly lost his mind, showing how incompetent he was at being a teacher. However, Yonho had to accept a new fact, where a stone had just floated toward him with tremendous pressure. Once again, his master expressed his gratitude, and even without a physical body, that did not mean he could not do anything to him. Not only could he move stones, but he could also control the small stones inside this cave. Yonho, realizing the situation, turned around and asked his master to calm down and not do it. Instantly, a group of stones floated toward Yonho and he could not move. If his master wanted to destroy him, he could do so, but he would still let Yonho live if he studied martial arts seriously. After that incident, Yonho's harsh training began regardless of day or night. All that existed was endless hard training, and Yonho no longer had time to complain. As a lazy person, the fastest way to end this situation was by completing the martial art that his master would pass down. When Yonho slept, his master used his technique to enter his dream in order to train him. Every night, Yonho had nightmares of that harsh training, indicating he never stopped training even a little. Then, the results of his training were visible, where his master made several stones float and Yonho dealt with them without looking back. The Sword Emperor who saw that smiled like an old grandfather happily watching the progress of his grandchild. Thus, 5 years passed without being noticed due to the endless training, and now Yonho could lift the large stone blocking the cave using his own hands. After a long time, his body finally touched sunlight. Now, he was ready to see the outside world and would shake everything.